not going to change unless, we get some sort of technology boom that makes it, just like the Industrial Revolution sort of had a shortcut in ending slavery because, you have the gin mill and you have the cotton gin and things like that, and all these technologies that you no longer need these people to work for you or something like that. So as of right now, I'm thinking it's not going to go away, and that's why we do need to talk about it. We need to have conversations like these. But why is this even a thing? Like, what makes people racist? What makes people prejudiced? That's a really, it sounds trivial, but it's the essence of why we're even battling this. So I did some research to get to the bottom of this, and I found out some things, and I got to the point where I asked myself the age-old question: is this nature or is this nurture?
The world we live
Here's
in
the argument for
normal,
nature.
Ordinary. It feels like this is just how humans exist and always existed.
For the sake of time, I'm gonna just segment this video.
Our story begins 6 million years ago.
Sorry about that. More technical difficulties.
The world we live in feels kind of...
All right, here we're gonna get this working.
Feels normal.
Okay.
Our story begins 6 million years ago, when the tribe of Hominini split and our relationship with the apes ended. 2.8 million years ago, the genus of Homo, the first humans, emerged. We like to think of ourselves as the only humans, but this is far from the truth. When we, Homo sapiens sapiens, came into existence 200,000 years ago, there were at least 6 other human species around. Cousins of comparable intelligence and ability, which must have been incredibly scary, kind of like living with aliens. Some of them were very successful. Homo erectus, for example, survived for 2 million years, 10 times longer than modern humans have existed. The last of the other humans disappeared around 10,000 years ago. We don't know what caused them to die out. Modern humans have at least a few percent of Neanderthal and other human DNA, so there was some mixing, but certainly not enough to be a merger between species. So we don't know if our cousins went away because they lost the battle over resources, or because of a series of minor genocides. Either way, only we remain.
So there are some interesting points that he brought up in there. He said there was some mixing, but certainly not enough to be a merger between species. He also said, so we don't know if our cousins or other species of human went away because they lost the battle over resources or because a series of minor genocides. Either way, only we remain. That is a strong argument for nature. Okay, in-group and out-group is a concept of sociology, and it's a well-defined concept that states that we act in the benefit, we act in order to preserve our group. So the early humans that we came from were acting in a sense to protect their group. And that being said, it doesn't matter whether resources were, we starved them out or we killed them all. We were acting to, make sure that our group survived and that we kept pressing forward. And this is not unique to humans. This is every single species of every single animal, even bacteria. They will grow and they will grow and they will preserve their species and kill every other species out there in order to keep growing. This is not a unique concept. This is the very essence of life. So, with that being said, it's kind of daunting. And when I got to this point and, you know, looking these things up, once I saw this video, I was like, well, can we not change it? Is this just, are we destined to be these in-group, you know, monsters that just keep demolishing everything in our paths for the sake of our specific group? And I did some more research, and I went on the side of nurture. And we're going to show this video. So this was, actually, I'll touch back on that. So we're going to show this. There we go.
Today's audience was separated into two groups, not on the color of their skin were they separated when they arrived. They were separated based on the color of their eyes, but they have no idea that they were separated. What we did was treat each group differently, discriminating against the people who have blue eyes, catering to those people with brown eyes. Come on. Close your eyes. No. Over there. The blue-eyed people were pulled out of line, told to put on a green collar, and wait outside. When the brown-eyed people arrived, they were told to step to the front of the line. Audience members with brown eyes were allowed to enjoy coffee and donuts. The blue-eyed group became upset when they saw the brown-eyed people were being seated first. Diversity expert Jane Elliott helped set up the experiment. I've been a teacher for 25 years in the public, private, and parochial schools in this country, and I have seen what brown-eyed people have done as compared to what blue-eyed people do. And it's perfectly obvious. And if I didn't believe it before this morning, you should have been here this morning when we brought these people in here. Feeling discriminated against, blue-eyed audience members were visibly upset. She was rude to all of us. Yelled at us, called us names, pushed us aside. She was rude. I want to say, why doesn't Jane have green collar? I want to stop blue-eyed. Because I've learned to act brown-eyed. I have a brown-eyed husband and 3 brown-eyed children. And the message in this room is, act brown-eyed and you too can take off your collar. Act intelligently and you too will lose your collar. None of you have acted intelligently yet. It wasn't long before the brown-eyed people bought into the idea that they were superior. You people, look, it is... She was so stupid. She was always copying off of my papers. These people were so rude and so noisy today, we couldn't hear any ourselves even talk. It was ridiculous. Eventually, the audience figured out the show was really about race. Now, he was so angry, he took off his collar way on early. How many of you people of color can take off the collar that we have put on you? How many of you can take off your color? But if a black male refused to follow your orders, or your husband's orders, or your father's orders, on the street, you would not see that as being highly principled. You would see him as being an uppity nigger.
Well, we can see where this is going. She's saying that everybody has racism in them. It's not really about the eye. She's trying to teach about racism. But she can't get away from the fact that God created the races, and you are going to be different. Can't help it.
God
to be like that.
One race, the human race, and human beings created racism. We caught it with the...
So, as you saw in that video, people are easily programmed. And it shows that we can be taught to be racist, and that throughout our entire lives we are taught to be racist. There are concepts that reinforce the way that we perceive our in-group and out-group and our place in society. So I said we're going to go back to this slide. So I came across this. This is a research paper done at East Carolina University by a couple of scientists who basically they surveyed a bunch of Americans and a bunch of Chinese citizens, and they saw where their group dynamics lied, and they averaged it out, and they found that Americans have a small in-group, what they perceive as their in-group, and other societies, so Chinese people have a very large in-group, what they consider a part of, very close to themselves. But they have a very small, a narrow middle group. So the people who they're, quote, lukewarm about, they only have a small amount of people that they're saying, okay, I don't know how to feel about you, and a very huge out group. So it's either yes, a black or white in Chinese society, whereas in American society, we have a very narrow in group and a very narrow out group, and a huge expanse of a middle group. So things that we don't have quite an opinion about, or are able to sway left versus right, that's the majority of Americans. And the reason why this is important is not to point out the differences between China and America. That's a whole different lecture. But to say that we are able to be made an in-group or an out-group if you're in that middle group. And that really gives us hope, because it says that we have the opportunity to accept others as in-group or completely reject them and say they aren't, they're subhuman or some different, I can't connect with them in any way. And I think in the Black Lives Matter movement, both have happened. You get to a point where you see what looks like terrorism, or what the media is portraying as terrorism, and you're saying, I can never connect to those people. They're crazy. They're animals. So then that's an instant out group. And you loculated those people away into the out group where they were middle group. Or you could happen to see something that's very peaceful, and what they stand for is exactly what you stand for, and you're like, hey, I can get down with that. And then you put them in your in group, and then you accept, and then you fight for them. But it also shows that Americans are fickle and easily changed, and just because you are in the in group doesn't mean that you won't become in the middle group or out group later on. And so what I wrote here is there are pros and cons to it. We have the ability to change, yet we lack the in-group connection that gives the passion that is required to press for that change. So in other words, we have that ability, but the only way that I'm going to work in order to improve, the movement or whatever you're standing for is if you are already in my in-group. I'm not going to go out of my way if I'm lukewarm about you. If you're in the middle group or the out group, I'm not going to fight for you. So that's where most Americans are in terms of this movement, in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of how to feel about, police brutality and things like that. Either most of the people are middle group, and you hear one radio station say something and, oh, okay, I agree with that. You hear somebody say the opposite, and yeah, I can see that. And then you're easily swayed. And what I think the purpose of the Black Lives Matter movement and other successful movements are to get as many people to view us as the in-group, as a part of your circle as possible, and to not scare people away or have them be lukewarm. So, does our DNA make being prejudiced easy? Yes. Can we learn to change the way we think about race? Yes. And I hope those two videos were great examples of how it is based on our DNA, and it's just a fact of life that we are group-centric, animals. But also the next video that I showed that you can easily be taught to be racist or eye colorist or whatever they want you to do just in a matter of an hour. That studio session was, less than a couple of hours long, and people already started to buy into it. So just imagine what, your entire life of being programmed, implicitly being programmed, to view about a certain race. So that led me to a point where I was saying, okay, we can change. It is sort of in our DNA, but there's a way to change. And how do we do that? So the first way, as far as anything, is to recognize that it is in you. And it's a concept called implicit bias. Everybody has implicit bias. It's important to read this definition because it has a lot of nuances in there that I don't want to sum up in a broad statement. So unlike explicit bias, which reflects the attitudes or beliefs that one endorses at a conscious level, implicit bias is the bias in judgment and or behavior that results from subtle cognitive processes, e.g. implicit attitudes and implicit stereotypes that often operate at a level below conscious awareness and without intentional control. The underlying implicit attitudes and stereotypes responsible for implicit bias are those beliefs that or simple associations that a person makes between an object and is evaluated that are automatically activated by the mere presence, actual or symbolic, of the attitude object. Although automatic, implicit biases are not completely inflexible. They are malleable to some degree and manifest in ways that are responsive to the perceiver's motives and environment. So this is saying that we are able to change those implicit biases that we have, but they're automatic. So it's something that you can't control. It's when you see an object, a cup, a chair, a person, a nose, a skin color, you have an automatic association with that, whatever it is based off of your life. But that association can change, and it's important to realize what your implicit biases are. So that's the first step. So I actually went online, and there's a website. It's called Project Implicit. It's an entire project that researchers at Harvard University did, and it's basically a survey that's been going on for about 12 years now, actually 13 years. It started in 2004, and they show pictures like these. And they show a black person's nose and a white person's nose, and they ask you to say which one is black or white. And there is a correct answer and an incorrect answer. So obviously the one on the left is black and the one on the right is white. So you have to press the E or the I key. You have to press two different keys with two different hands to associate that face with the race. So that's the start of it. Here you go in, this is basically saying what I said, and it shows you weapons, and it says, okay, press this button for the weapon, press this other button for the harmless object, and there's a right and wrong answer. So obviously the grenade is a weapon and the Coca-Cola is a harmless object. Well, I guess it depends on who's using it, but for the most part, it's a harmless object. So let's begin. A red X appears, and it's quite sharp, and it makes you feel like, oh no, I'm going to fail this test. So you go as fast as you can, and you press the buttons, and you move on. So I went through this, and it shows white American, and then it, if you put, so at first, let me explain this clearly. At first, it tells you to put the harmless objects in as the same key that you're pressing for white Americans, and the weapons as the same key that you're pressing for black Americans. And then it asks you to switch that. So it says harmless objects for black Americans, you press the same key, I, and then weapons for white people. So you press the same key as that for E. So as you can tell, this is already sort of complicated, but when you get to the end of it, you start to notice yourself when you're taking it, and you're saying, wow, that was really easy to, put one, associate one thing to one race, and it was a lot harder to flip the script and associate it to the other one. So it actually tracks how many times and how long you take in order to do that. and it categorizes your implicit bias on this because, as we stated before, it's an automatic response to objects and for people. So I took the results, and it says your data suggests a moderate automatic association for harmless objects with Black Americans and weapons with white Americans. Okay, you got me. I have implicit biases too. Have you seen all those mass shootings? Like, I'm sorry. It's a little scary at sometimes. But the point of this is to show you that everybody has intrinsic bias. And it's important to recognize that first in order to press for change. And let's find out what everybody else thinks. So I'm actually in the very, very small subsect. It's at 3% of people have the same associations as me. And I gotta say I was kind of trying to do it that way. It's not a real reflection of my biases. But as you can see, there were 530,000 people that took this test. And of those people, it's been going on for a long time. Of those people, that's a whopping, 73%? That's 73% of people have an association with Black Americans with weapons. And that's their intrinsic bias. It's not things that they're doing on purpose. It's how their brain is wired, how it was programmed to be wired, since a young age. So it's important to see these numbers and to correlate them to why things are going on. Why is racism a thing? Why do people, have this association with Black people? Why are people afraid of Black people? It's because of this. I think that is the first step in how I approached answering this question. Maybe Black Lives does need emphasis in the title Black Lives Matter. Maybe that's why Black is specified so much. You get to a point where the only way to counterbalance something that's so heavy on one side that you have to sort of force it to, the middle or force it to the other side. You have to have this huge counterweight in order to, equilibrate things. So that's why we as in, like I started it, but that's why Black Lives does need emphasis in these situations. So we're all asking ourselves these questions. Why have so many white police officers killed unarmed Black people? And maybe it's because of this. So an associate professor at NYU in the psychology department, his name is David Amodio, he wrote this: you think of yourself as a person who strives to be unprejudiced, but you can't control these split-second reactions. Those split-second reactions he's talking about are the implicit biases. And this, an impressive body of research psychological research suggests that the men who killed Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin need not have been conscious, overt racists to do what they did. And he's talking more about the intrinsic bias and the split-second reaction when they see a Black face. They associate it with weapons if they're a part of this 73% of people that do that, which likely they are. And maybe this. So this chart has a lot going on, but I really want you to focus on one key concept. On the right is a preference for white Americans over Black Americans, and on the left, which they didn't even include for half of this because there's, as you see my red box, there's only this group of people that associate this. But on the left, it's a preference towards Black Americans. So as you see, the only group that has a preference for Black Americans are Black Americans. Every other group, and they separated it by a lot, female, male, ages, education levels, whatever political liberal. If you are strongly liberal, you still only slightly, prefer white Americans over black Americans, but you still prefer that. And they did it through, this is the same group, the Project Implicit from Harvard. So they did other tests in order to find these things out. But what this is saying is what we've been thinking all along. This isn't news. This is not news. This is what people believe, and it's just put in a number format. It's put in a graph. And like I said before, the first step in moving forward and progressing is to know the facts. You have to know this, that this is a fact, and you can't turn your head away. Well, you know, I'm a strong liberal, and as you see in this graph, it doesn't make a difference. And overt explicit bias is different. Maybe if this was explicit bias, you'd have more of a preference towards black because they're trying to overtly counteract what they truly feel. Or what, you know, maybe they don't even know they truly feel it. It's just an unconscious thing. But that unconscious thing is strongly in this direction. So the same question, why have so many white police officers killed unarmed black people? And this is basically what put, for lack of a better term, the nail in the coffin. So the propensity to shoot, and this was a study done, as you see, by the Journal of Personality and Social Physiology in 2007. It showed the propensity to shoot in officers and in the community. So first of all, I have to give officers credit because they are less likely to shoot than a random person, a community member, which they should be. That's why they're trained. But it also shows that they're more likely to shoot black Americans than they are white Americans. And this next one over here, it's participants are slower to press don't shoot when unarmed target is black. So even if the target is unarmed, they take a lot longer to press the don't shoot and say, oh, everything is safe, don't shoot. It takes them this short amount of time to say, okay, he's unarmed, press the don't shoot button. But if he's black and still unarmed, it'll take them, you know, effectively a relative double amount of time to, you know, say that the person is safe. And that's because of the implicit bias to say that black people are associated with weapons. And this one over here is if the target was armed, how quickly would the person press shoot rather than, you know, not shoot? And it shows that white officers and community members are much more quick to shoot the target if he's black, because of the implicit bias. And, you know, it takes them a lot longer to, you basically have some decision making in this split second to say, okay, shoot him because he's armed. But you see that he's white first and you say, okay, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Even if, so none of this, like I keep saying again, and I think it's important to reiterate this, all of this is automatic. And it's not something that you're doing on an overt level. You can see these milliseconds. It's not like you're saying, okay, I'm racist, so I'm going to shoot this guy first. This is just a snap, a split second. And as we've seen, a split second can do a lot of damage. So I'm not going to talk through these, just going to show you the slides. You can already start to notice if you have implicit biases and you see the picture on the right and you say, well, that guy's clearly dangerous. Just something to consider. Think about it. This man, maybe there are some extrinsic biases going on because they unloaded, I think, 16 rounds in him. It's not a split second. So after we properly grieve, how do we get the others to see us as more in-group and less out-group? Should we even bother trying? Do we want them as our in-group? We get to a point where you feel like you're so powerless, you don't think that anything will ever change. But I think it's important to be like this ant, and we can do big things. They can lift 10 times their body weight. I think it's important to realize that we do need others, and we need them to see us as an ally and to advocate for us. We shouldn't segregate ourselves in the midst of tragedy. We have to look to people who are maybe in that middle group or who see us as middle group, and we have to convince them, as the saying always goes, we have to work twice as hard at everything. So this shouldn't be new. We have to convince people to, join our cause and to be advocates for us. So, how did this whole movement get started? First, it started with the tragedy, and it started with powerful members of the community getting together, and you see the Black Power fists going up, not in, notice anything inside of you that when you see that fist, you get a little uneasy. Just think about these things throughout the day. When you see people walking down the street and they look a certain way or they're wearing certain clothes, evaluate yourself. Say, I felt a little scared. Why did I feel scared? And over time, if you keep doing that, you will be programmed in a positive way. You're going to unwrite all of the programming and all of the coding that society has done to us, saying that Black people are dangerous, Black people have weapons, be afraid of Black people. And you're going to start to realize that this is silly. This guy had a hat on, and he had dreadlocks, and I was afraid of him. And you start to do that and get in the practice of doing that, and you'll start to see yourself change. So on the topic of change, so we've had enough. People took to the streets. Hands up, don't shoot. All the news stories that you've seen about riots going on. And the guy with the American flag flipped upside down. It's hard to think that this country loves you when every chance they get, they're going to shoot. We see all the shootings of unarmed, innocent Black people getting the death sentence. So all of us had enough. You see in this picture, there's every race, or a lot of races. And I think that's beautiful. It shows that nobody, the majority of people aren't explicit, overt racists that want to kill Black people. But that if you look in this population, they probably still have an intrinsic bias for white people. Even though they are fighting, even though you may be fighting for change and to stop police brutality and to, unite races and things like that, you still likely have an implicit bias. And I think that's important to realize, that none of us are above this. None of us. But that's not so important. And that you can change things. Just because you have that quick split-second reaction, you can still counterbalance that by active practice throughout the day, like I said before. So, how did it actually get started? So we started a campaign of change, and I say we purposefully, as you included, anybody who is against police brutality and is against the execution of unarmed black men and women, you're a part of this too. So this is Elisa Garza speaking. She says, I created the Black Lives Matter with Patrice and Opal, those are her sisters, as a call to action for black people after 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was posthumously, which is basically after he died, placed on trial for his own murder, and the killer, George Zimmerman, was not held accountable for the crime that he committed. It was a response to anti-black racism that permeates our society and also, unfortunately, our movements. So when they say our movements, prior to saying that, they say the anti-racism that permeates our society and, unfortunately, our movements. It's as if they took on the police officers and George Zimmerman and other people that have committed those crimes. They said they included as as if they had a hand in committing the crime. And I think that's important, one, because it is effectively saying, hey, it's okay, you're one of us, and we forgive you for having that split-second implicit intrinsic bias. But it also is a call to say that, hey, we want you as an in-group advocate for us, and we don't want you to continue to feel these ways and to separate and let this tragedy separate our races. So, moving back to this slide, we know that this is true. This is a fact, that most people do prefer, white people over black people. And as sad as that seems, that's why this organization was started, as a counterbalance to that. There comes a point, like I said before, where you have to make it clear, Black Lives Matter, because everybody knows that white lives matter. You don't have to tell them that. So this is from their website, and I encourage you all to go to it. It's a well done, it looks nice, the website, first of all, and it talks about events going on in the country and other things like that. And they say when we say Black Lives Matter, we are broadening the conversation around state violence to include all ways in which black people are intentionally left powerless at the hands of the state. So they're not just talking about police brutality, but they're talking about other ways that black people are, stripped of their rights and things like that. Access to lawyers, access to health care. I didn't include the research in there, but there is a broad amount of research on the health disparities in the community. And obviously Brian could talk more about that. He has a master's in public health, so that's pretty much what he does on a day-to-day basis. So we know how it started, and you're thinking, but it's still not working. This whole Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, isn't doing too hot. Like it's it's suffering in the media. People already turn their backs to it halfway, and why are you still clinging on to this thing? And I have a theory, and so this slide is coming from me, and this is what I think. But it's showing that peaceful protests get more empathy, but they get less publicity. And violent protests get more publicity, but then they get less empathy. So the fact that you saw those, rocks and fireworks and cities being burned down and all that stuff, that caught your attention, but it made you shy away from it. It made you stick those people in the outgroup. Those guys are monsters. I don't care what they're going for. You're killing police officers and doing all this stuff. But if you have a peaceful protest, chances are it's not going to be seen on TV. It doesn't make for good TV, and I don't really blame the media for this. You're not going to get good ratings. People want to see action. But with that being said, you're going to get a lot more empathy out of a peaceful protest, and but you're going to suffer from that because nobody's going to be able to see it. So that's a balance that we have to overcome that, and I don't know of a way to overcome that. If you have any ideas, I would love to. This is now when you type in that comment section and show the grand scheme of how we get around this and have a lot of publicity and a lot of empathy, and it be peaceful. And, we get people in our in-group, and then we finally push for change. But historical examples have not shown anything different. Even Colin Kaepernick, he decided to do a peaceful, so he was already in the limelight, so that's how he got the publicity. But he took a knee during the Pledge of Allegiance, and they hated him for it, and he lost endorsement deals for it. And even peaceful protests lost him empathy. So maybe he was the example of how this thing was switched. But, the majority of cases, this is how it is. So what has been happening?
We begin this week with so much emotion and unrest all across the country after those devastating shootings. You see some rallies, like this one in Minnesota, did turn violent over the weekend. Dozens of officers injured. This healing is going to be hard.
And we have so many striking images to show you. This encounter between a young woman and officers in riot gear in Baton Rouge. And last night, people asking for peace in Los Angeles, protesters joining hands, making a statement as the country mourns the loss of those lives in Louisiana and Minnesota, and of course those.
So that was showing you some, examples of both sides of the story. There was a peaceful one, and that was one of the rare occasions that you do get publicity. And then there was a violent one, which every news station was covering, where it was showing, the fireworks and all that stuff. And it's also a part of the grieving process. You're upset that these people can get away with murder. And you feel slighted and hated and like you're not welcome in this country. And, so movements aren't perfect, but it's an expression of the status quo. And you see the anger and the angst in the people. And, this is a reflection of what's going on. So, as I said before, I'm a medical student, so I was really curious about the concept of empathy, more empathy, less empathy, and how we can get people on our side and to really care about our movement. If we do, do a peaceful thing and, get a lot of publicity, will people care, or will they stop caring? So there was research done. I believe Khan Academy did this research, and they showed they gave a score, an empathy score, and it was a bunch of questions, and it gave you a certain amount of points based on how empathetic you were. So baseline, you're a normal citizen. You come in, you're 114.4. You are as empathetic as ever. And the end of third year of medical school, it drops by a lot. And for people that don't know, third year medical student is when we see patients every single day. So you're wondering, you see patients every day and you care less? Like, how is that a thing? But then think about it. You see on Facebook and you see all those sad images of, starving kids in Africa and all that stuff. There was a campaign about that. And, you see, or for instance, the commercial with the dogs, and it was the Sarah McLachlan song, and you just teared up every single time. After a while, it stops working. After a while, you get desensitized to it, and because you've seen it enough, and your body's like, I don't want to cry anymore. Let's just scroll by. That's also not unique to us. Our bodies adapt to everything by making stimuli less efficacious. In layman's terms, basically we have mechanisms in order to downregulate, certain receptors that we have. So if you have this anxiety and you have all this cortisol running through your body's going to make less receptors for cortisol so that you're not anxious anymore. So that's the same concept when you see sad images and you have that rush. These are all chemicals that are going on in your body. The knot that you feel in your stomach, those are actually neurons that are firing and making you feel, queasy and making you feel sad and things like that. So your body makes a lot less of those receptors if you keep being stimulated by them. So that's why we become desensitized. That's the science of desensitization, and it happens with empathy. In other words, we become jaded. But that's not the end of it. At the end of fourth year of residency, so after medical school, you do residency to train and do whatever you're going to do with your life. You're seeing patients of upwards of 90 hours a week. You're thinking, shouldn't that desensitize you more? But something is actually different in this. This is when you grow and you see lives changing, and you persevere, and you see that, hey, I'm making a difference. And the patients you see, you start to connect to them more, not just as something you're scrolling by and saying, this again, another patient, or, to keep it in context of what we're talking about, another Black Lives Movement, or another black kid that got shot, like, can't we just end this? And I feel like in this country right now, we're in third year of medical school, where we're losing interest. But what needs to happen is dedication to the movement, that in-group buy-in, and it shows that empathy can be resensitized. So I'm a part of the White Coats for Black Lives movement. So why do we exist? Basically because of the Black Lives Matter movement. We found that we need to specify why Black Lives Matter in medicine just as well as they're doing in other public places. So medicine is not immune to racism. And if anything, it shows more so the access of healthcare and certain insurance companies that, black people tend to have, and you see that on the list and the charts, and you're like, okay, we only have a certain amount of money to, allocate towards this patient and things like that. And a lot of that is financial, but a lot of that stems from racism. So I think that's why we started the chapter, or not I think, that is definitely why we started the chapter. And so what are we doing to help? This was us doing the die-in. So this picture's a little fuzzy, but that's me on the right. You can see right there. I'm looking pretty cool right there with my gloves. But basically we're showing movie screenings. We're doing themed lunch lectures. Basically as much stimulation and as much access that we can provide, we're giving it to people. So and one of the themes to the lunch lectures was what physicians look like, where we have black physicians in order to do a counter narrative and say, physicians come in every shape and size, and, just to give people, I can't think of the word, but access to seeing this sort of thing. So this on the left is a quote from Thomas Edison. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. This is basically showing that perseverance wins this fight. Let's see. Let's skip for the sake of time. 1:14. There we go.
So never give up. Without commitment, you'll never start. But more importantly, without consistency, you'll never finish. It's not easy. If it was easy, there'd be no Kerry Washington. If it was easy, there'd be no Taraji Henson, Pete Henson. If it were easy, there'd be no Octavia Spencer. But not only that, if it were easy, there'd be no Viola Davis. If it were easy, there'd be no Michael T. Williamson, no Stephen McKinley Henderson, no Russell Hornsby. If it were easy, there'd be no Denzel Washington. So, keep working, keep striving, never give up, fall down 7 times, get up 8. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. So, keep moving, keep growing, keep learning. See you at work.
I think that video speaks for itself. So we are going to move on to the discussion section.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Bailey. And want to just start by offering my apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning in particular. And as a reminder, we have recorded today's presentation. We'll be posting that on the Public Health Association and the COSOFI websites so that we can access that again. And of course, all of the links to the great videos and to the Implicit Bias Project are posted within that presentation. So you can go back and check out those resources in more depth. So a lot of great comments across the presentation. A couple of questions that we're going to a couple of questions that we'll address. So any other research on why other groups that are not African Americans do not prefer African Americans? And I think this is going back to the Implicit Bias Project and the charts where all of them were going right, with the exception of one. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, or some additional research if you're aware of any?
So when you get to asking the question of why this is a thing, why do people prefer African Americans? This is more of a question to ask, yourself and of other individuals. And it's when you get to, I'm not sure if there is research, and this is why I'm trying to explain this, because when you go and you start to write things down as far as a questionnaire is concerned, and they're saying, why does this person, why do you like this person over this person? You're going to say, oh, well, I don't. And you're going to start to instantly do that explicit bias. And you're going to say, you're going to counterbalance what you truly, are automatically inclined to feel. So it gets to a point where it gets a little muddy, and it's hard to accurately and, truthfully gather evidence on why people prefer white people over black people. Then, so it's kind of hard to, delineate that after a point. But it's a clear, it's status quo, and it's not too hard if you think about it. Just look around and ask your neighbors and uncles and anybody that you know, or except for black people, because we're the only ones that prefer us.
So next question. So it's pretty common in my experience, and clearly to others, that you hear white people who say that I don't see color. So would you say that a statement like that is more problematic? Do you see that as being more part of the solution or more part of the problem when people approach the topic of racism with that perspective?
I think it's definitely a part of the problem. To say you don't see color it's a lie. You clear it. Well, I mean, unless you're colorblind, then you can still see shades, I guess. But to get to the core, the crux of what they're actually saying, I don't view race in my decision making, and that's not true. Everybody does. Everybody has an implicit bias. If they took that test, they would press a button faster or slower based off of whether you were black or white. And that's how everybody is, and it's the truth. So to lie and to be in denial and say, "Oh, I don't see race. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me." It does. And I think that's avoiding the truth, and any nugget of any progress that can be made has to be nestled in the truth. That's the foundation that needs to be strong. And if you don't have a strong foundation, the building's going to fall, the tree, however the metaphor goes, but it's true. You need truth to be at the center of your heart in order to change.
Very well said. Okay, we are well over our originally scheduled time, so please access these resources. We're going to include other ways that you can also get involved with White Coats for Black Lives, additional resources posted on the Public Health Association website, as well as COSOFI, so that people can get engaged. As you heard from Bailey, allies are incredibly important, and I think the public health community, which is really rooted in a health equity approach, has a responsibility to step up and get involved. So encourage folks to check out those resources, connect with Bailey, connect with the Public Health Association and COSOFI. Thank you very much for your time and for joining us. We'll have information out about our June webinar within the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out.
Thank you, guys.